My father did not scream when he called me a liability. He said it with the calm of a man liquidating damaged goods. He exiled me into a Chicago blizzard, pregnant and penniless, while signing away my inheritance to secure a loan. That night, I vowed to buy back that house with my own change. 7 years later, I do not just own his debt. I own the lawyer drafting his bankruptcy papers. Never call a woman a burden. My name is Sabine Montrose. But on that night 7 years ago, I was simply Sabine Sterling, a 22-year-old girl who still believed that blood was thicker than water and that the law was a shield for the righteous. I was wrong on both counts. The memory of that evening does not play in my mind like a movie. It plays like a deposition, every detail sharp and admissible in the court of my conscience. It was the dead of winter in Chicago, a winter that the meteorologists had been warning us about for weeks. Outside the heavy oak doors of the Sterling Manor, the wind was howling, a banshee screaming against the stone facade. Inside, in my father's study, the air was perfectly still and smelled of lemon polish and expensive scotch. I stood before the mahogany desk that dominated the room. Richard Sterling sat behind it. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a titan of industry, with his silver hair perfectly coiffed and his suit pressed to military precision. He was reading a document, his gold pen hovering over the signature line, looking for all the world like a man burdened by the weight of empires. But the document on the desk was not a merger or an acquisition. It was a lie. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and placed my finger on the paper. The signature at the bottom read, Sabine Sterling, but the loops were too wide, the slant too aggressive. It was a forgery, a very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. "You signed my name," I said, my voice barely rising above a whisper. "This is the trust fund Mom left for me. You used it as collateral for the Sterling Heights expansion without asking me." Richard did not flinch. He did not look up. He simply flipped the page, his eyes scanning the fine print. "It is a bridge loan. Sabine, a temporary reallocation of assets to fix a liquidity issue. The bank required a secondary guarantee. I provided it. You forged my signature," I repeated, the reality of it settling in my stomach like lead. "That is fraud, Dad. That is a felony." Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were the color of steel, and just as hard. There was no guilt in them, only annoyance. He took a sip of his scotch, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. "It is business," he said, his tone flat. "And you are going to validate it. The bank needs a confirmation of signature witnessing by tomorrow morning. I have the affidavit right here. You will sign it, stating that you signed the original loan documents 3 days ago." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. It looked so innocuous, just a piece of paper, but it was a trap. "I cannot do that," I said, stepping back. "I am an intern at the district attorney's office. If I sign a false affidavit, I could be disbarred before I even take the bar exam. I could go to jail." Richard sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested I was being unreasonably difficult about a dinner menu rather than a federal crime. "Sabine, do not be dramatic. No one looks at these things that closely. If you do not sign this, the financing for Sterling Heights collapses. If the project collapses, the stock price tanks. We lose everything, including the tuition for that law school you love so much." He leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave. "Sign the paper, and you keep your internship, you keep your car, you keep your life. Refuse, and I will make a few calls. I will ensure your internship ends tomorrow for unprofessional conduct. I will make sure no firm in Chicago hires you." I stared at him, unable to breathe. This was the man who had taught me to ride a bike. This was the man who had sat in the front row at my high school graduation. He was blackmailing me, but I had a card to play, a card I had been terrified to reveal, but one I thought might shatter his icy exterior. I placed my hand on my stomach. It was flat, giving away nothing, but I knew what was growing inside. "I cannot go to prison for you," Dad, I said, tears pricking my eyes. And I cannot lose my future, because it is not just my future anymore. I am pregnant. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Richard stared at my stomach, then back at my face. His expression did not soften, it hardened. Pregnant, he repeated, as if tasting a spoiled wine. Yes, I said, a small spark of hope igniting in my chest. It is Julian. We were going to tell you next week, after the quarterly review. I expected shock. I expected anger. I even expected a lecture on responsibility. I did not expect him to press the intercom button on his desk. Julian, Richard said into the speaker, come in here. My heart leaped. Julian was just outside. Julian, his brilliant, charming executive assistant, Julian, who whispered promises of forever in the dark of his apartment. He would stand by me. He would explain to Richard that we were a family, and families do not send each other to jail for insurance fraud. The heavy oak door opened, and Julian walked in. He looked impeccable in his navy suit. The tie I had bought him for his birthday knotted perfectly at his throat. He looked at Richard, then at me. His eyes were guarded. She told you, Julian said. It was not a question. She did, Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair. She seems to think this condition gives her leverage to refuse a simple request regarding the family business. I looked at Julian, pleading with my eyes. Julian, he forged my signature on the trust fund documents. He wants me to lie to the bank. I told him about the baby because we have to think about the future. Julian looked at me, and in that moment, the man I loved evaporated. In his place stood a climber, a man who measured his self-worth by the proximity to power. He did not step toward me. He stepped toward Richard's desk. Sabine, Julian said, his voice smooth and detached, the voice he used for difficult clients. You are overreacting. The loan is standard practice. Your father knows what he is doing. But the baby, I choked out. Our baby. Julian grimaced, a flash of distaste crossing his handsome features. It is a timing error. Sabine, that is all it is. A mistake in the schedule. He looked at Richard, then back to me. I have discussed this with your father. We agree that you are not in a position to raise a child. It would destroy your career. It would be a distraction for the company. My knees felt weak. You discussed it with him before you talked to me. You should get rid of it, Julian said, as casually as if he were suggesting I change my shoes. For the sake of your dignity, for the sake of the family name, we can try again in 5 or 10 years, when you are actually established. I looked from Julian to Richard. They were a united front, 2 men in suits deciding the fate of my body and my morality. I am not killing my child, I said, my voice shaking but loud. And I am not signing that fraud. Richard stood up. He was tall, imposing, a shadow that swallowed the light in the room. He picked up the affidavit I had refused to sign and tore it slowly down the middle. Then you leave me no choice, Richard said. He walked around the desk and stood in front of me. He looked at me with clinical detachment. You are not an asset to this family. Sabine, you refuse to protect our interests. You bring scandal into my house with this bastard child. You drain resources. He paused, and the words he spoke next would be branded onto my soul with a hot iron. You are a liability. He turned his back on me. I am cutting you off. The trust fund is frozen until the investigation into your mental instability is complete. I will see to that. You are removed from the will effective immediately. The door opened again. Elena, my stepmother, stood there. She did not look shocked. She looked prepared. She was holding a plastic grocery bag and a coat, my old beige wool coat, the one I used for gardening, not my heavy winter parka. Your phone, Elena said, extending a manicured hand, and the credit cards. They are in the company name. Elena, please, I said, looking at her. She had never been warm, but she had been civil. It is minus 20 degrees out there. I am pregnant. Phone, she repeated, her face a mask of bored irritation. Numbly, I handed over my phone, then my wallet. Elena opened the wallet, took out the black card, the platinum card, and even my driver's license. She shoved a $20 bill into my hand. "A severance package," she sneered. She threw the thin coat at me. I barely caught it. Before I could say another word, Richard's security guard, a man I had known since I was 12, stepped out from the hallway. He would not look me in the eye. He took my arm, not gently, and steered me toward the front door. "Dad!" I screamed, turning back. Richard was already sitting down, picking up his pen. Julian was pouring himself a drink. Neither of them looked up. The front doors opened, and the violence of the storm hit me like a physical blow. The wind shrieked, tearing through the thin wool of my coat instantly. I was shoved forward, and the heavy doors slammed shut behind me. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed like a gunshot. I was alone. I stumbled down the long, heated driveway, the snow already soaking through my loafers. The cold was absolute. It was not just a temperature. It was a predator. It bit into my skin, turning my fingers and toes into blocks of ice within minutes. The wind whipped my hair across my face, blinding me. I walked because if I stopped, I knew I would die. I walked past the wrought iron gates of the estate, out onto the public road where the snowplows had not yet come. The world was a white void. Every step was a battle against the instinct to just lie down and sleep. I do not know how long I walked. 2. The $20 bill had blown out of my frozen fingers miles ago. My mind began to fracture. I hallucinated warmth. I thought I saw my mother waiting for me in the swirling snow. I collapsed under the concrete overpass of the interstate. My legs simply refused to carry me another step. I curled into a ball, trying to shield my stomach, trying to give the tiny life inside me a few more minutes of heat before the end. My vision blurred. The darkness began to creep in at the edges, soft and inviting. Hey girl, you gotta move." The voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. I forced my eyes open. A face hovered over me, wrapped in layers of dirty scarves. It was a woman. Her skin weathered and cracked like old leather. Her eyes sharp and intelligent. "You stay here. You freeze," she said. She grabbed me under the arms. She was surprisingly strong. She dragged me deeper under the bridge, behind a barrier of cardboard boxes and plastic tarps. There was a fire there, burning in a rusted oil drum. It was small, but to me, it felt like the sun. She pushed me down onto a pile of old blankets that smelled of damp wool and exhaust fumes. She took off her own outer layer, a heavy, grease-stained men's parka, and wrapped it around my shoulders. "Drink," she commanded, holding a tin cup to my lips. It was hot water, tasting of metal, but it was the best thing I had ever tasted. I sat there, shivering violently as the blood began to return to my extremities. The woman sat opposite me, feeding the fire with scraps of wood. She did not ask who I was. She did not ask why a girl in silk blouse and loafers was dying under a bridge in a blizzard, on the streets. Questions were expensive. Survival was the only currency. I looked out past the shelter of the cardboard, toward the highway, through the breaks in the storm. I could see a massive billboard illuminated by floodlights. It was a rendering of a gleaming glass tower, surrounded by happy, laughing families. Sterling Heights. The slogan read, "Building the future you deserve." The irony tasted like bile in my throat. My father was building a future for strangers while leaving his own daughter to freeze to death in the shadow of his ambition. Julian was climbing the corporate ladder while the mother of his child slept on garbage. I reached under the dirty layers of the homeless woman's coat and placed my hand on my stomach again. The cold had not reached there. I could feel the warmth of my skin. I could feel the pulse of my own blood. They thought I was a liability. They thought they had written me off, liquidated me, erased me from the ledger. They thought I would die here in the snow. A tragic accident to be mourned briefly at a press conference before the news cycle moved on. I stared at the glowing letters of the sterling name. The tears on my cheeks had frozen, but inside, the ice was melting. It was being replaced by something hotter, something harder. "I am not a liability," I whispered to the howling wind, my voice raspy but steady. "I am a debt, and I always collect." I closed my eyes. The image of the burning billboard seared into my retina. I would survive this night. I would survive the poverty that was coming. I would raise this child. And one day, I would return to that office with the lemon polish and the oak walls. I would not knock. I would not ask. I would take. I tightened the dirty blanket around me and waited for the dawn. The storm was raging, but the fire in the oil drum crackled on. Defying the wind, I watched the flames dance, and for the first time in my life, I understood what I had to become. Not a daughter, not a lawyer, not a victim. I had to become the fire. They call us vultures. In the polite society of Chicago high finance, where handshakes are firm and knives are hidden behind silk pocket squares, my firm, Obsidian Capital, is spoken of in hushed, distasteful tones. They say we feast on the dying. They say we circle the wounded animals of the corporate world, waiting for the scent of blood to turn into the stench of rot. They are absolutely right. But what they fail to understand is that in an ecosystem built on greed, the vulture is the only honest creature. We do not kill for sport. We clean up the mess left by the lions who think they are immortal. 7 years have passed since I walked out of the snow and into the fire. I stood in my corner office, looking out at the skyline. The glass was thick, bulletproof, and tinted to cut the glare of the afternoon sun. My reflection stared back at me. The girl who had begged for her life in a wool coat was gone. In her place was a woman wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than the annual rent of the apartment I had lived in for the first 3 years of my exile. My hair was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob, severe and efficient. My eyes were no longer wide with hope. They were narrow, calculating, assessing the structural integrity of everything they touched. My assistant buzzed in. "Gabriel is here, Ms. Montrose. He says the data from the first trust breach is ready." "Send him in," I said, turning away from the window. While I waited, my mind drifted, as it often did when I was on the precipice of a kill. Back to the smell of lemon dish soap and stale grease. The first year was a blur of exhaustion that sat deep in my marrow. I had found a job washing dishes at a diner in the South Side, a place where the eggs were greasy and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. I worked 10 hours a day. My hands submerged in scalding water until my skin was raw and peeling. My fingernails softened to paste. I was 22, pregnant, and homeless in every way that mattered. Renting a room the size of a closet above a laundromat that shook every time the spin cycle hit. But every night, after I scrubbed the smell of frying onions from my hair, I went to the public library. I did not go there for warmth, though God knows I needed it. I went there for the books on commercial law, forensic accounting, and distressed asset management. I remember sitting at a scratched wooden table, my belly pressing against the edge, reading about leverage ratios and bankruptcy restructuring while the homeless man across from me snored into a newspaper. I devoured knowledge with the desperation of a starving wolf. I learned that the law is not a moral code. It is a user manual for a weapon. My father had used it to bludgeon me. I was going to learn how to disassemble the gun and build a cannon. When Maya was born, I brought her home to that vibrating apartment. I had no crib, so I made a bed for her in a dresser drawer lined with the softest towels I could steal from the laundromat downstairs. I looked at her tiny, perfect face, her eyes that held the same steel gray as my father's, but none of his cruelty, and I made a promise. She would never know she was poor. We played games. Dinner was not leftover diner scraps. It was a secret picnic. When the heat was cut off because I was 3 days late on the bill, we built a fortress of solitude out of blankets and pretended we were Arctic explorers. I worked double shifts. I took online paralegal courses using the library computers. I saved every penny, literally counting nickels in a jar, until I had enough to buy my first suit from a thrift store and bluff my way into an interview at a small, predatory debt collection agency. I rose. I did not climb the ladder. I clawed my way up the rungs, pulling the splinters out of my hands as I went. I learned that money does not talk. It screams. And debt is the silence that follows the scream. The door to my office opened, snapping me back to the present. Gabriel walked in. Gabriel was my greatest find, arguably more valuable than any stock portfolio. I had found him 2 years ago, wasted in the back room of a failing tech startup. A data genius who could see patterns in numbers the way a composer hears music in silence. He was awkward, disheveled, and brilliant. He wore a hoodie under his blazer, a silent rebellion I permitted because he made me millions. "Sabine," he said, skipping the pleasantries. He placed a tablet on my desk. "The algorithm flagged it at 4 this morning. You were right. The leverage on the Crown project is not just high, it is mathematical suicide." I picked up the tablet, swiping through the visualizations Gabriel had built. The Crown. It was Richard's magnum opus, a 60-story luxury residential tower that was supposed to redefine the Chicago skyline. It was also his vanity project, the monument he wanted to leave behind to prove he was a god. "He is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul," Gabriel explained, pacing the room. "Look at the cash flow statements from the subsidiaries. He is draining the liquidity from the Sterling Heights maintenance accounts to pay the interest on the construction loans for the Crown. He is using the completed buildings as collateral for the new loans, but the occupancy rates in the old buildings are dropping because he fired the maintenance staff to save money. He is eating his own tail," I murmured, studying the red lines plummeting on the graph. "How deep is the hole?" "Deep," Gabriel said, "but here is the kill shot. First Trust Bank. They hold the primary construction note. $50 million. I looked up. $50 million? "The bank is panicking," Gabriel said, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of the hunt. "The internal chatter suggests the risk assessment team at First Trust has downgraded the Crown's viability to junk status. They know Richard is behind schedule. They know he is dodging calls. They want out. They want to offload the debt before the quarter ends, so it does not look like a non-performing loan on their books." I stood up and walked to the wall of monitors displaying real-time market data. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a slow, heavy rhythm. This was it. This was the moment I had spent 7 years bleeding for. Richard Sterling was a man who believed in optics. He believed that if a building looked shiny on the outside, it did not matter if the foundation was rotting. He thought he could charm the bank, delay the payments, and shuffle the money around until the Crown was finished. He did not understand that banks do not have feelings. They have algorithms, and right now, the algorithm said he was toxic. "First Trust wants to sell the note," I asked. "They are shopping quietly," Gabriel confirmed. "They are looking for a quick exit. They are terrified of a default. If Richard defaults, the bank has to seize an unfinished building. Banks hate owning half-built skyscrapers. It is a liability." There was that word again, liability. "What is the asking price?" I asked. "They are desperate," Gabriel said. "Market rumors say they will take 60 cents on the dollar." "No," I said instantly. "Too high. If they are truly scared, they will take less." I walked back to my desk and sat down. I opened the secure terminal that gave me access to Obsidian Capital's liquidity pool. We had a good year, a very good year, but $50 million face value. Even at a discount, it would require almost every cent of liquid capital we had. It was a gamble that would make a Las Vegas whale sweat. If I bought this debt, I would become Richard's primary creditor. I would hold the mortgage on his dream. I would hold the power to foreclose, to seize, to destroy. But if Richard managed to secure emergency funding from somewhere else, or if the real estate market rallied unexpectedly, I would be stuck with a massive note that tied up all my capital, leaving Obsidian vulnerable to its own creditors. I thought of Maya. She was 7 now, attending a private school where they taught French and violin. She was safe. She was happy. If I did this and failed, we would not go back to the drawer in the laundromat. but the empire I had built to protect her would fracture. Then I thought of the signature, the forged signature on the trust fund documents. I thought of Julian standing next to my father, calling our child a mistake. I thought of the $20 bill Elena had shoved into my frozen hand. They had bet against me. They had bet that I would disappear. They had bet that I was weak. "Offer them 40, I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the server drives. Gabriel stopped pacing. He looked at me, blinking. 40 cents on the dollar, that is $20 million for a $50 million note. That is insulting. Sabine, they will laugh at us." "They won't laugh," I said, leaning forward, my hands clasping together. "Because you are going to send them the drone footage of the Crown construction site that we took yesterday. The footage that shows the site has been empty of workers for 3 weeks. You are going to remind them that winter is coming, and if that shell isn't sealed, the weather damage alone will cost $10 million to fix." I paused, letting the strategy take shape. "Tell them Obsidian Capital is the only firm with the liquidity to close the deal in 48 hours. Cash, no financing contingencies. We take the headache off their hands. Instantly. They get to wipe their hands clean and tell their shareholders they mitigated a disaster." Gabriel typed furiously on his tablet. "It is everything. Sabine, the reserves, the operational capital. If you do this, we are running on fumes until the next quarter." "I know," I said. "Is it worth it?" he asked, looking up. He knew the history. He knew why the name Sterling made my jaw clench. But he was a numbers man, and this was an emotional trade. I looked at the photo on my desk. It was just Maya and me, taken at the park last Sunday. We were laughing. I had fought for that laughter. I had scrubbed toilets and analyzed spreadsheets until my eyes bled to ensure no one could ever take that laughter away from us again. Richard Sterling was not just a bad businessman. He was a threat. As long as he held power, as long as he could wield influence, he was a danger to me and my daughter. He had proven he would break the law to save himself. I had to break him before he remembered I existed. "It is not just debt, Gabriel," I said softly. "It is judgment. Send the offer." Gabriel nodded, a small, terrifying smile touching his lips. He hit send. I sat back in my chair. The leather creaking, the die was cast. I had just bet $20 million that my father was a failure. I closed my eyes and let the adrenaline wash over me. I remembered the feeling of the freezing wind on my face that night. It had felt like death then. Now, it felt like power. I was not the girl shivering under the bridge anymore. I was the bridge. I was the storm, and Richard Sterling was about to find out that the forecast called for ruin. "And Gabriel," I added, as he turned to leave. "Yes, boss. Set up a shell company, Nemesis Holdings. Register it in the Caymans. I do not want my name on that purchase agreement until the ink is dry. Richard cannot know it is me. Not yet." "Nemesis," Gabriel chuckled. "A bit dramatic, isn't it?" "He likes Greek tragedy," I said, swiveling my chair back to the window to watch the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city that was now mine to conquer. "I am just giving the audience what they want." The phone on Gabriel's tablet pinged, a single notification. He looked down, then up at me. His face was pale. "First Trust," he said. "They accepted. They want to close tomorrow morning." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just felt the trap snap shut. "Prepare the wire transfer," I said, "and call my driver. I want to drive past the Crown tonight. I want to see what I just bought." The conference room on the 42nd floor of the First Trust Bank building was designed to intimidate. The table was a slab of black marble that looked like a tombstone, and the view of the Chicago skyline was meant to remind you that the men sitting here owned the city. But at 6 a.m, with the cleaning crew still vacuuming the hallway outside, the vice president of commercial lending, Arthur Henderson, did not look like an owner. He looked like a man who had not slept in 48 hours. I sat opposite him, perfectly still. I had not touched the coffee he had offered. I wanted him to see that I did not need his hospitality. I needed his fear. "Ms. Montrose," Henderson said, adjusting his glasses. He was sweating, a fine sheen of perspiration on his upper lip that betrayed his desperation. "The offer is aggressive. 40 cents on the dollar for a secured construction note of this magnitude. It is unheard of. The asset." "The asset is a ghost town," I interrupted. My voice level, I slid a file across the marble table. It hit the surface with a heavy thud. "That is the independent assessment my team ran yesterday. The Crown is 18 months behind schedule. The concrete suppliers have put a lien on the property for non-payment. The electrical contractors walked off the job last week. Richard Sterling is not building a skyscraper. Arthur, he is building a mausoleum for your career." Henderson flinched. He opened the file, his eyes darting over the photos of the rusted girders and the empty cranes. "We have assurances from Mr. Sterling." Henderson tried to argue, but his voice lacked conviction. "He claims he is closing a new round of mezzanine financing next week." "Richard Sterling lies," I said. "He is borrowing from his own shadow. Look at page 5. He is cross-collateralizing the Sterling Heights residential units to pay the interest on your loan. But the occupancy rate in Sterling Heights has dropped to 65% because the elevators have been broken for 3 months. When the tenants launch a class action lawsuit, and they will, within the month the value of that collateral hits zero when that happens. The bank examiners will not just fire you, Arthur, they will investigate why you held on to a toxic asset for so long." I leaned forward. "I am not offering you a discount. I am offering you a life raft. You sell me the note for $20 million today, and you get to write off the loss as a strategic divestment before the quarterly earnings call. You get to tell the board you proactively manage the risk. If you wait until Richard defaults, which he will do in less than 90 days, you will be explaining to the shareholders why you lost $50 million on a vanity project." The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning system fighting the morning sun. Henderson looked at the file, then at me. He was doing the math. He realized that the woman sitting across from him was not a vulture. She was the inevitable conclusion of his own bad judgment. "The buyer entity," he said finally, his voice defeated. "Nemesis Holdings. It is an offshore shell. Registered in the Cayman Islands," I confirmed. "Fully capitalized. The wire transfer is ready to go. No names, no press, just a clean break." Henderson uncapped his pen. His hand shook slightly as he signed the transfer agreement. I watched the ink flow onto the paper, dark and permanent. With that signature, he handed me the blade of the guillotine. "Done," he whispered. Pushing the papers back to me, I checked the signature. It was valid. I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. "You made the right choice. Arthur, tell Richard the debt was sold to a private equity group specializing in distressed real estate. Keep it vague." "He will want to meet the new owners," Henderson said. "He will?" I agreed, a cold smile touching my lips. "In due time." I walked out of the bank with the contract in my briefcase. It weighed less than a pound, but it felt heavier than gold. I had the sword. Now, I needed the shield. While I was dismantling his financial foundation, Richard Sterling was doing what he did best, pretending to be a king. My surveillance team had tracked him to the Onyx Room, a private members club where the membership fee cost more than the average American family earned in a year. The photos Gabriel sent to my phone showed Richard holding a crystal flute of champagne, surrounded by sycophants and potential investors. He was laughing, his head thrown back, his teeth gleaming under the chandeliers. He was boasting about the crown, telling them it would be the jewel of the Midwest, promising returns that were mathematically impossible. In the background of one of the photos, standing near the edge of the frame, was a man who looked like he wanted to disappear into the velvet wallpaper. He was holding a briefcase, his shoulders hunched, his eyes scanning the room nervously. Marcus Vance, the family lawyer, the man who had drafted the paperwork to strip me of my name, the man who had looked at a pregnant 22-year-old girl and told her that her father's love was a contractual obligation that had been terminated. I swiped to the next image. It was a video clip taken by a contact inside the club. Richard turned to Marcus, snapping his fingers. "Marcus," Richard's voice boomed over the ambient jazz music. "Stop looking like a funeral director and get over here. Pour a drink. Tell these gentlemen about the zoning permits we just crushed." Marcus stepped forward, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "Of course, Richard. The city council was very cooperative." "Cooperative," Richard laughed, slapping Marcus hard on the back, making the smaller man stumble. "We bought them just like we pay you to keep the inspectors off our backs. Speaking of pay, Marcus, stop sending me invoices every week. You will get your fee when the building opens. You are like a mosquito, buzzing in my ear about retainers." The other men laughed. Marcus turned a deep shade of crimson. He lowered his head, humiliated, trapped. Richard did not know it, but he was kicking a dog that was already rabid. I closed the video. Gabriel had done his digging well. Marcus Vance was not just a spineless lawyer. He was a desperate gambler. He had a weakness for high-stakes poker, specifically in the underground games run by the Russian syndicates in West Loop. And unlike my father, Marcus did not have the capital to cover his losses. He owes $300,000 to a man named Nikolai. Gabriel had briefed me earlier. They have given him until Friday to pay, or they start breaking fingers. He's been skimming from his firm's escrow accounts to pay the interest, but he is tapped out. He is drowning. "Sabine." "Perfect," I had replied. I checked my watch. It was 2 a.m. Richard would be partying until dawn. Marcus, however, would be leaving soon. He had a deadline. I signaled my driver. "Take me to the parking garage of the Onyx Room." The garage was dimly lit and smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. I waited in the back of my black sedan, watching the elevator doors. At 2:45, they opened. Marcus Vance walked out. He was walking fast, checking his phone, his movements jerky and paranoid. He looked like a man who heard footsteps behind him even when he was alone. He reached his car, a 5-year-old Mercedes that had seen better days. He fumbled with his keys, dropping them on the concrete. As he bent down to pick them up, I opened my car door and stepped out. The click of my heels echoed in the silence. Marcus froze. He snatched up his keys and spun around, his eyes wide with fear. When he saw it was a woman, he relaxed slightly, but the tension remained in his shoulders. "Mr. Vance?" I said. My voice was soft, echoing off the concrete walls. He squinted, trying to see my face in the shadows. "Who is that?" "I do not have any cash on me." I stepped into the pool of light from the overhead lamp. "I am not looking for charity, Marcus. I am looking for an investment." He stared at me. For a moment, there was no recognition. 7 years is a long time, and money changes a person's face as much as surgery. Then, he saw the eyes, the sterling eyes. "Sabine," he gasped. He took a step back, hitting the door of his car. "Sabine Sterling." "Montrose," I corrected. "Sabine Montrose. Sterling is a dead name." "My God," he whispered. I heard you were gone. What are you doing here?" "I am here to discuss your portfolio," I said. "Specifically, your liabilities." I walked closer, stopping just outside his personal space. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was not a contract. It was a copy of his ledger from the underground casino. Gabriel had bought the information for $5,000 a bargain. $300,000, I said, reading the number aloud. "Due to Nikolai by Friday, that is a lot of billable hours, Marcus, and since Richard is not paying his invoices, I imagine you are in a difficult position. Escrow fraud is a felony. You know, if the Bar Association found out you were borrowing from client funds, you would be disbarred before you could say, 'all in.'" Marcus went pale. He looked at the paper, then at me. He was trembling. "How did you get that?" "What do you want?" "I don't have the money. Please, Sabine. I was just doing what your father told me back then. I had no choice." We always have a choice, I said coldly. You chose the winner, or who you thought was the winner. I took another step. I bought your debt. Marcus? He blinked, confused. What? I contacted Nikolai an hour ago. I lied smoothly. I paid him $300,000 in cash. You do not owe the Russians anymore. You owe me. Marcus slid down against his car door until he was crouching on the dirty floor. He looked like he was about to vomit. Relief and terror were fighting for control on his face. You paid it. I did, I said. And now I own you. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. I could smell the stale alcohol and the fear on his breath. Here is the deal, I said, my voice hard as diamond. You are going to stand up. You are going to go home, tomorrow morning. You are going to go into the office and smile at my father. You are going to take his abuse. You are going to draft his letters. You are going to be the loyal family dog you have always been. And in return, he asked, his voice shaking, in return, I do not send this ledger to the police, and I do not send Nikolai back to finish the job. I said, but from this moment on, you work for Richard, but you report to me. Every contract he signs, every loan he applies for, every dirty secret he tries to bury, I want a copy on my desk before the ink dries. Marcus looked at me. He saw the transformation. He saw the power. He realized that the frightened girl he had evicted 7 years ago had returned as the executioner. He will kill me if he finds out, Marcus whispered. He is already killing you, I said. I am the only one offering you a resurrection. I stood up and offered him a hand. It was a test. He hesitated for a second, then reached out. His palm was clammy. I pulled him to his feet. Do we have a deal, Mr. Vance? Yes, he said, looking at the ground. Yes. We have a deal. Good, I said, turning back to my car. Go home, Marcus. Get some sleep. We have a busy week ahead. You need to help my father prepare for a surprise. What surprise? He asked. I paused with my hand on the door handle. He has a new creditor, I said, and she is very demanding. I got into the car. As we drove away, I watched Marcus in the rearview mirror. He was standing alone in the empty garage, a small, broken man who had just traded one master for another. But this time, his master was not driven by greed. She was driven by the absolute necessity of balance. I touched the leather briefcase next to me, the sword and the shield. I had them both now. It was time to draw blood. The first tightening of the noose was not a scream. It was a whisper. It arrived on Richard Sterling's desk at 9 o'clock in the morning via a private courier service that cost more than my first car. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with the logo of Nemesis Holdings, a stylized pair of scales tipping ominously to one side. Inside was a formal notice of debt restructuring. To the untrained eye, it looked like standard legal correspondence, but to a man like my father, who had spent his life burying people in paperwork, it read like a ransom note. I sat in my office at Obsidian Capital, 3 blocks away. Staring at the phone on my desk, I had instructed Marcus Vance to call me the second Richard opened it. I did not have to wait long. At 9:14, my private line blinked. He is throwing things, Marcus whispered. The connection was clear, but his voice was shaking. I could hear the muffled sound of shattering glass in the background. Richard must have thrown one of his beloved crystal tumblers against the wall. Read me the reaction, Marcus, I said, leaning back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look at the city below. Do not summarize. I want the details. He is pacing, Marcus said. He is red in the face. He keeps shouting, asking who the hell Nemesis Holdings is and why they are demanding a 20% immediate liquidity injection. He says the terms are predatory. He says it is illegal. It is perfectly legal, I said, my voice smooth. It is aggressive, yes, but he signed the original agreement with First Trust, which allowed for the transfer of the debt to any third party with full retention of rights. Nemesis Holdings is simply exercising its right to audit the collateral. Tell him that. I cannot tell him that, Sabine, Marcus stammered. He is looking for blood. He wants me to file an injunction. Let him vent, I commanded. And then, when he runs out of breath, you are going to offer him the solution we discussed. You are going to be his savior. Marcus, you are going to tell him that there is a way to keep Nemesis at bay. I heard Richard's voice roar in the background, muffled but distinct. Get me the legal team. Get me the damn phone number for this Cayman shell company. I will not be bullied by some offshore ghost. Now, Marcus, I said, drop the bait. I listened as Marcus cleared his throat. I could imagine him standing there, the small, sweaty man I had broken in a parking garage, now acting as the architect of my father's demise. Richard, Marcus said, his voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. An injunction will take weeks. The contract stipulates that if you contest the audit, they can freeze the construction accounts immediately. The Crown stops today if you fight this. The shouting stopped. Silence hung heavy over the line. Then what do I do? Richard snapped. They want $10 million in cash by Friday to prove solvency. I do not have $10 million liquid. It is all tied up in the concrete orders. We could offer additional collateral, Marcus suggested tentatively, to show good faith. If we securitize your personal assets, the unencumbered ones, we can satisfy the solvency requirement without spending cash. It is just a paper transfer. Richard, a formality to get them off your back until the mezzanine financing comes through next month. My personal assets. Richard sounded disgusted. You want me to pledge my own property? The Sterling Manor, Marcus said. The vacation home in Aspen, the vintage car collection, and the art. The Banksy alone is worth $2 million. If we wrap it all into a personal guarantee, Nemesis will have to back down. They will see you are fully invested. It buys us time. I held my breath. This was the crux of the plan. The $50 million note on the building was business. This was personal. I did not just want to bankrupt his company. I wanted the house. I wanted the heavy oak door that had slammed in my face. I wanted the room where he had told me I was a liability. Do it, Richard spat out. Draft the papers. But tell them this is temporary. Once the building opens, I am refinancing with Chase and telling these Cayman vultures to go to hell. I will get right on it, Marcus said. And Marcus, Richard added, his voice dripping with venom, if you screw this up, you are finished. The line went dead. I smiled at the receiver before placing it gently back in the cradle. He had taken the bait. He was going to sign over the deed to the Sterling Manor to a company owned by the daughter he had disowned. The symmetry was exquisite. However, the trap was not yet sealed. There was a loose end. Julian, my ex-lover, the father of my child, and the man who had climbed to the position of chief operating officer over the wreckage of my life. Julian was weak, but he was not stupid. He knew the numbers better than Richard did. While Richard was busy raging about his ego, Julian would be looking for the logic. My suspicion was confirmed 2 days later. Gabriel walked into my office without knocking, his face grim. We have a ping on the firewall, Gabriel said. Someone is digging into the Nemesis Holdings registration data. They are using a private investigator's license to query the Cayman registry. They are trying to pierce the corporate veil. Trace it, I said. I already did. The IP address resolves to a luxury condo in the Gold Coast. It is Julian's home network. I nodded slowly. Julian was getting nervous. He smelled a rat. If he dug deep enough, he might find a connection to Obsidian Capital. He might not find my name directly, but he would find enough to make Richard pause before signing the personal guarantee. I could not allow that. It is time to send the gift, I said. Are you sure? Gabriel asked. It is nuclear. He sold his own daughter for a promotion. Gabriel, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. He does not get to have a happy marriage while I am fighting for scraps. Send it. Julian had done well for himself. He had married the daughter of a real estate tycoon 3 years ago, cementing his status in Chicago society. His wife, a socialite named Victoria, was known for her jealous streak and her control over the family fortune. Julian played the part of the devoted husband perfectly in public. But I knew Julian. He needed validation, and he usually found it in the beds of women who were impressed by his title. Currently, that validation was coming from a 23-year-old fitness instructor named Chloe. My private investigators had been tracking them for weeks. That evening, a courier arrived at Julian's penthouse. It was not marked as business. It was wrapped in silver paper, looking like a late wedding anniversary gift. The doorman delivered it directly to Julian while he was having dinner with his wife. I was not there to see it, but I played the scene in my head 1,000 times. Julian opening the box, expecting a watch or a bottle of wine. Instead, finding a simple manila envelope. Inside were 2 things. First, a copy of a DNA test result from 7 years ago. It showed a 99.9% probability of paternity between Julian and Maya Montrose. It was the proof he had tried to erase, the child he had called a timing error. Second, a series of high-resolution photographs taken 3 days ago. Julian and Chloe leaving a boutique hotel. Julian kissing Chloe in his Porsche. Julian's hand on Chloe's leg. There was no note, no demand for money, no instructions, just the silent, terrifying knowledge that someone was watching him. Someone knew about the past he had buried and the present he was hiding. If he continued to dig into Nemesis Holdings, the next package would not go to him, it would go to his wife. And if Victoria found out, Julian would be on the street faster than I had been. He would lose his status, his money, and his access to the club. The effect was instantaneous. The next morning, Gabriel reported that the inquiries into the Cayman registry had stopped completely. Julian had gone dark. He was terrified. He was likely walking on eggshells, waiting for the other shoe to drop, too paralyzed by his own guilt and fear to worry about Richard's debt problems. He had been neutralized by his own sins. With Julian silenced and Marcus pulling the strings, Richard walked into the trap with his eyes wide open. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus delivered the documents to my secure Dropbox. I held them in my hands, feeling the texture of the paper, the deed of trust for the Sterling Manor, the titles to 3 Ferraris, the bill of sale for the art collection, all of it signed by Richard Sterling, notarized, and pledged as additional collateral to Nemesis Holdings in exchange for a temporary forbearance on the debt. He had literally bet the house, but Richard, ever the showman, could not let the world see him bleed. To counter the rumors that were starting to swirl about the construction delays, he called a press conference. It was held in the lobby of the unfinished Crown Building. I watched it on the massive screen in my conference room, sitting alone at the head of the table. Richard stood at the podium, flanked by a pale, sweating Julian and a stoic Marcus. Richard looked fantastic. He was wearing a $3,000 suit. His tan was perfect, and his smile was dazzling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed into the microphone, "I am hearing rumors started by jealous competitors who lack the vision to change this city. They say the Crown is in trouble. They say we are out of money." He laughed, a rich baritone sound that had charmed investors for decades. "I am here to tell you that the Sterling family has never been stronger." He lied, looking directly into the camera. "We have secured a new partnership that solidifies our financial position for the next decade. The Crown will open on schedule. Our liquidity is robust. We are not just building a tower, we are building a legacy." I watched him, my expression unmoving. He was so convincing. He almost believed it himself. He thought that by signing over his house, he had bought himself safety. He thought Nemesis Holdings was just another bank he could manipulate. He did not read the fine print. I picked up my phone and dialed Gabriel. "Is he still live?" I asked. "Yes," Gabriel said. "He is taking questions now." "Do it," I said. "Execute the acceleration clause." The acceleration clause, it is a standard provision in most commercial loan agreements. But the version Marcus had slipped into the debt restructuring addendum, the one Richard had signed without reading because he was too busy panicking, was particularly brutal. It stated that if the borrower failed to maintain specific insurance covenants, The lender had the right to demand immediate repayment of the entire principal and interest. Not next month, not next week, immediately. Richard had let the builder's risk insurance policy on the Crown lapse for 48 hours last week, while switching providers to save a few $1,000s on premiums. It was a minor administrative error, a clerical oversight. In a normal relationship, the bank would send a warning letter. But I was not a bank. I watched the screen. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune raised her hand. "Mr. Sterling, can you comment on the report that First Trust sold your debt?" "Standard business." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Debt is traded all the time. It means nothing." At that moment, phones began to buzz in the crowd. First one, then another. The reporters looked down at their screens. A press release had just been blasted out by Nemesis Holdings. Press release. Nemesis Holdings declares default on Sterling Heights development due to a material breach of contract regarding insurance requirements. Nemesis Holdings has exercised its right to accelerate the $50 million loan to Richard Sterling and Sterling Development Corp. The full amount is due immediately. Foreclosure proceedings on all collateral, including personal assets pledged by Mr. Sterling, will commence in 24 hours. I watched the color drain from Julian's face as he checked his phone. He leaned over and whispered something to Richard. Richard stopped mid-sentence. His smile faltered. He looked confused, then angry, then terrified. "What?" he mouthed. The reporters began shouting questions. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you have defaulted? Mr. Sterling, did you pledge your personal residence? Mr. Sterling, are you bankrupt?" Richard stared into the blinding flashbulbs, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He looked around for Marcus, but Marcus had stepped back into the shadows, his head bowed. I took a sip of my sparkling water. The water was cold, crisp, and clean. "Checkmate, father," I whispered to the empty room. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. Richard Sterling had not just lost his money. He had lost his credibility, his home, and his lie. And he still did not know that the person pulling the trigger was the girl he had thrown out into the snow. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow had started to fall outside, light dusting covering the city in white. It reminded me of that night, but this time I was on the inside, and he was about to learn just how cold it could get. The summons was delivered at 8 a.m. By noon. Richard Sterling was exactly where I wanted him. I sat in the executive conference room on the 55th floor of the Blackstone Tower. It was a calculated choice of venue. From here, through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, I had a direct line of sight across the street to the Sterling Enterprises building. I could look down literally and metaphorically on the office where my father played emperor, but today, the emperor was coming to plead for his throne. I spun my leather chair around to face the window, my back to the heavy mahogany door. I wanted him to walk into a room that felt like a courtroom. I wanted him to see the silhouette of his executioner against the backdrop of the city he claimed to own. My reflection in the glass was perfect. I wore a white suit, sharp as a scalpel, a stark contrast to the black and navy tones usually worn by the men in this industry. It was a statement. I was not hiding in the shadows anymore. I was the light that would expose the cracks. The clock on the wall ticked. 1:17. He was early. Richard Sterling was never early. He considered punctuality a virtue for subordinates, not for leaders. But when you owe $50 million and have 48 hours to pay it, you learn to respect the clock. I heard the heavy doors open. The sound of footsteps echoed on the marble floor. There were 3 sets. First, the heavy, aggressive stride of my father, even in defeat. He walked like he was charging into battle. Second, the nervous, shuffling gait of Julian. The man who had sold me out was now walking into the lion's den. Terrified of the shadows I had cast over his life in the last 48 hours, and finally, the quiet, resigned tread of Marcus Vance, the only one who knew the face of the devil waiting in the chair. "This is ridiculous," Richard's voice boomed, bouncing off the glass walls. "Where is the representative? I do not wait for offshore paper pushers. Marcus, Did you tell them who I am? I told them, Richard, Marcus replied, his voice barely a whisper. Please, just sit down. I will not sit down, Richard snapped. I want to see the person who thinks they can accelerate my debt based on a clerical error. I want to see the face of the coward hiding behind a Cayman shell company. I am going to sue them into the Stone Age. I listened, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. He sounded so confident. He truly believed this was a misunderstanding, a business dispute he could bully his way out of with bluster and legal threats. He had no idea that the clerical error was a trap, and the coward was his own blood. Sir, Julian said, his voice tight with anxiety, we should be careful. The acceleration clause is ironclad. If we antagonize them— Quiet, Julian, Richard barked. You are here to take notes, not to give advice. I handle sharks. I have been eating people like this for breakfast since before you were born. He slammed his briefcase onto the table. Hello, is anyone there? Or do you prefer to conduct business like a mute? I took a breath. The air in the room was sterile, recycled, and cold. It was the perfect atmosphere for a reunion. I am here, Richard, I said. My voice was calm, low, and controlled. It stopped him cold. He did not recognize the timbre immediately. 7 years had added a depth, a resonance of authority that the 22-year-old Sabine never had. I pressed the button on the armrest, and the chair slowly rotated. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not empty, it was heavy, pressing down on the chest like physical weight. Richard stared at me. He blinked. Once, twice, his brain was trying to process the visual data, but it was rejecting the conclusion. He saw a woman in a white bespoke suit, wearing diamond earrings that cost more than his car, sitting at the head of the table with the posture of a queen. Her hair was different. Her makeup was different. Her eyes were the same, but the fear was gone, replaced by a terrifying intelligence. Who are you? He asked, his brow furrowing. You look familiar. He did not know me. The realization stung for a fraction of a second before hardening into steel. He had erased me so completely from his life that he did not even recognize his own daughter when she sat 5 feet away. I did not speak. I just looked at him. Julian gasped. He stepped back, his hand flying to his mouth. He knew. Of course, he knew. He had seen the DNA test. He had felt the pressure. Sabine, Julian whispered, the name choking him. Richard whipped his head around to look at Julian, then back at me. His eyes widened. The arrogance slipped, just for a moment, revealing genuine shock. Then, it was replaced by a sneer of disbelief. Sabine. Richard let out a short, harsh laugh. My Sabine, the intern. He looked around the room as if expecting cameras to jump out. Is this a joke? Did competitors hire you? Did they find you in some gutter, dress you up, and put you in this chair to rattle me? It is clever. I will give them that. Psychological warfare. He leaned over the table, placing his hands on the polished surface. He looked at me with pity and disdain. How much are they paying you? Honey, whatever it is. I will double it. Just tell me who sent you. I did not blink. I reached for the thick leather folder on the table. I opened it slowly, deliberately. No one sent me. Father, I said. I slid the folder across the table. It slid smoothly, stopping inches from his hands. I am Nemesis Holdings. Richard looked at the folder, then at me. He opened it. Inside was the transfer agreement from First Trust Bank, the wire transfer receipt for $20 million, the registration papers of the Cayman entity, and at the bottom of every page, the signature of the sole director, Sabine Montrose. He flipped through the pages, his hands starting to shake. He read the numbers. He read the names. The color began to drain from his face, leaving it pasty and gray. This is impossible, he stammered. You have no money. You left with nothing. I made sure of it. You made sure I left with nothing but my anger, I corrected him. You forgot that anger is a fuel. Richard, while you were building glass towers on shaky foundations, I was building a war chest. I did not just survive, I conquered. I stood up. I was wearing 4-inch heels, which made me tall enough to look him directly in the eye. I am the sole owner of the $50 million note secured by the Crown Project, I stated, my voice ringing with the clarity of a judge reading a verdict. I am the holder of the personal guarantees you signed 2 days ago. I own your debt. I own your building. And as of 48 hours ago, I own the mortgage on your house. Richard stepped back, stumbling slightly. He looked at Marcus. You knew, Marcus. You knew this. Marcus did not look up. He stared at his shoes, his voice trembling. I work for the creditor. Richard, that is the law. You traitor! Richard screamed, lunging toward Marcus. Sit down. I slammed my hand on the table. The sound was like a gunshot. Richard froze. He looked at me, his chest heaving. The dynamic in the room shifted violently. He was no longer the CEO scolding a subordinate. He was a debtor facing a loan shark. You cannot do this, Richard hissed, trying to regain his composure. You are my daughter. You cannot evict your own father. It is unnatural. Unnatural? I asked, walking slowly around the table toward him. Was it natural when you forged my signature to commit bank fraud? Was it natural when you told a pregnant girl she was a liability and threw her into a blizzard? Was it natural when you erased me from the family trust to save your stock price? I stopped directly in front of him. Do not talk to me about nature. Richard, let us talk about contract law. I am your father, he roared, his face turning purple. I gave you life, and you tried to starve it out of me, I countered instantly. But that does not matter anymore. We are not family in this room. We are counterparties, and you are in default. I turned to Julian. He was pressed against the wall, trying to make himself invisible. And you? I said softly. Julian flinched. The man who advised me to get rid of it for the sake of my dignity. How is your dignity doing? Julian, does your wife know about Chloe yet? Or are you waiting for the right moment to tell her? Like a timing error. Julian's eyes filled with tears. Sabine, please. I was young. I was scared of him. We were all scared of him, I said. But only one of us had the spine to say no. I turned back to Richard. He was panting, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, a loophole, a way to win. He realized that the emotional appeal was not working, so he tried to pivot to aggression. Fine, Richard spat. You bought the debt. Congratulations. But you cannot foreclose. The Crown is worth $300 million upon completion. If you stop construction now, you lose your investment too. You need me. I am the only one who can finish that building. The contractors answer to me. The city permits are in my name. He straightened his jacket, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. You are bluffing. Sabine, you are just a girl playing dress-up with hedge fund money. You do not know the first thing about construction. If you fire me, the project dies, and your $50 million evaporates. I smiled. It was the moment I had been waiting for. You assume I want the building, I said. I walked back to my chair and picked up a second document. I held it up. This is a demolition permit application, I said. Pre-approved by the City Council this morning. It turns out the land under the Crown is more valuable as a green space tax write-off for my portfolio than your unfinished vanity project. Richard's jaw dropped. You would tear it down. It is 80% complete. I do not care about the building, Richard, I said, leaning in close. I care about the lesson. I am willing to burn $50 million just to watch you stand in the ashes. That is the difference between us. You worship money. I use it as ammunition. You are insane, he whispered. You are a monster. I am what you made me, I replied. I threw the demolition permit on the table next to the loan documents. But, I said, I am also a businesswoman, and I hate waste, so I will offer you a deal, a settlement. Richard looked at the papers, then at me. Hope, desperate and pathetic, flickered in his eyes. What deal? Option A. I said, holding up one finger. You pay the full $50 million plus interest and penalties within the remaining 24 hours. If you cannot, I foreclose. I seize the crown. I seize your house. I seize your cars. I seize the art. I strip you of every asset you pledged. You leave Chicago bankrupt and homeless. I cannot raise $50 million in a day, he rasped. You know that. Option B, I continued, ignoring him. You sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure. You voluntarily surrender the Crown Project to Nemesis Holdings today. In exchange, I release the lien on your personal residence. You get to keep your house. You get to keep your car. You retire. You walk away. Richard stared at me. Surrender the company, my legacy, the Sterling name. Ah, yes, I said. The name. There is one more condition. I pulled out the final document. This is a public statement, I said. It announces your immediate resignation as CEO of Sterling Development due to health reasons. It appoints me, Sabine Montrose, as the new chairman of the board, and it acknowledges that the name of the company will be changed effective immediately. Changed to what? He asked, his voice barely audible. Montrose Development, I said. My mother's name, the name you tried to bury. Richard's face contorted in rage. Never I built this company from nothing. It is mine. I will drag you through court for 10 years. I will sue you for insider trading, for extortion, for everything. You have no money for lawyers. Richard, I shouted, my voice finally rising, cracking the veneer of calm. Marcus works for me. The banks have blacklisted you. First Trust sold you out. You are done. I took a deep breath, reining in the fire. You have 24 hours, I said, my voice dropping back to a lethal whisper. Sign the surrender, or I take the house. And I put you out on the street in the snow, and unlike you, I will not give you $20. I pressed the button on my desk. The door lock clicked open. Get out of my office, I said, and take your liability with you. Richard stood there, trembling with impotent fury. He looked at the papers, then at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was a man watching his own obituary being written in real time. He grabbed Julian by the arm, his grip so hard I could see Julian wince. We are leaving, Richard snarled. This isn't over. It was over 7 years ago, I said to him. You just didn't notice. They stormed out. Marcus lingered for a second, looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. The demolition permit, Marcus whispered. Is it real? The application is real, I said, sitting back down and turning my chair toward the window. But I have no intention of tearing it down. Marcus, I am going to finish it. I just needed him to believe I was crazy enough to do it. He believes it, Marcus said. I believe it. Good, I said. Now go. Make sure he understands he has no moves left. The door closed. I was alone again. I looked across the street at the unfinished skeleton of the crown. It looked different now. It didn't look like a monument to Richard's ego. It looked like a blank canvas. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I placed them flat on the cold glass of the table. I had looked him in the eye and stripped him of his power. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. But the hardest part was not breaking him. The hardest part was yet to come. Because a wounded animal is dangerous. But a wounded narcissist is lethal. He would try something desperate. I was counting on it. I picked up the phone and dialed my head of security. Put a 24-hour detail on Maya, I said, and double the guard at her school. He is cornered. He is going to lash out. I hung up and watched the snow swirl around the skyscrapers. Let him try. I had bought the debt. I had bought the lawyer. Now, I was ready to pay the price of war. I should have known that a cornered rat does not just surrender. It bites. It claws. And if it is Richard Sterling, it aims for the jugular. I had walked out of that boardroom feeling invincible. I had stripped him of his dignity and laid out the terms of his surrender. I thought I had broken him, but I had made a fatal error. I had assumed that Richard Sterling operated with a shred of humanity. I had assumed that there were lines he would not cross, boundaries of decency that even a narcissist would respect. I was wrong. The counterattack did not come in the form of a business counteroffer or a plea for mercy. It came with the heavy tread of federal boots on my office floor. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, just 22 hours into the 48-hour deadline I had given him. I was reviewing the foreclosure filings with Gabriel when the glass doors to Obsidian Capital were pushed open with aggressive force. 6 men in windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI and SEC marched in. They did not knock. They did not ask for permission. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of a raid team. "Sabine Montrose," the lead agent barked, flashing a badge that looked like a shield of doom. "Step away from your computer. Hands where we can see them." "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded. Standing up, my heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "I have clients in this building. You are disrupting a trading floor. We are executing a search warrant for the premises of Obsidian Capital and Nemesis Holdings," the agent said, dropping a thick packet of papers on my desk. "Allegations of wire fraud, market manipulation, and insider trading regarding the acquisition of the Sterling Heights debt." Insider trading. I laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "I bought a distressed asset from a bank that was begging to sell it. That is capitalism, not a crime. The complaint alleges you utilize stolen proprietary data to artificially devalue the asset prior to purchase," the agent said, signaling his team to start unplugging the servers, "and that you conspired with internal employees of Sterling Enterprises to commit corporate espionage." I froze. Richard. He was not just defending himself. He was flipping the board. He was accusing me of the very thing he had done for years. By claiming I had stolen data, likely pointing to the information Marcus had provided, he was turning my due diligence into a felony. "This is a retaliatory move by a debtor in default," I said, my hands shaking slightly as I reached for my phone. "I am calling my lawyer." "You can do that," the agent said, snatching the phone from my hand. "But this device is evidence, and so are your bank accounts. We have obtained a temporary freeze order on all liquid assets associated with Obsidian Capital and your personal accounts pending the investigation." A freeze. My blood ran cold. If my accounts were frozen, I could not pay the legal fees to fight this. I could not pay my staff. I was paralyzed. But the true blow, the one that would bring me to my knees, was not financial. It walked through the door 5 minutes later in the form of a process server. He looked out of place amidst the chaos of the FBI raid. A small man in a cheap suit, holding a manila envelope. He looked at me, then at the agents ransacking my files. "Sabine Montrose?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You have been served," he said, thrusting the envelope into my hand. "Family court, emergency custody hearing." I stared at the envelope. Family court. I tore it open, my fingers ripping the paper. The words swam before my eyes. But the header was clear: Julian Thorne versus Sabine Montrose. Petition for sole custody of minor child, Maya Montrose. I read the first paragraph, and the room began to spin. Julian, my spineless, cheating ex-boyfriend who had ignored his daughter's existence for 7 years, was filing for full custody. But it was the justification that made bile rise in my throat. The petitioner alleges that the respondent, Sabine Montrose, suffers from severe, untreated psychological instability. The petitioner asserts that the respondent is engaged in a pathological vendetta against the petitioner's employer and family, demonstrating a dangerous obsession that endangers the welfare of the child. "He is calling me crazy," I whispered. "Read Exhibit A," Gabriel said softly. He was standing beside me, having read over my shoulder. His face was pale. I flipped to the back of the petition. Exhibit A was a medical evaluation. It was dated 7 years ago. The letterhead belonged to Dr. Elizabeth Aris. I knew that name. Dr. Aris was Elena's best friend. She was a psychiatrist who spent more time at country club luncheons than at the hospital. I had met her once, briefly, At a Christmas party when I was a teenager, I had never been her patient. Yet, here it was, a detailed, falsified psychiatric report claiming that at 22, I had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder with violent tendencies and delusional episodes. It claimed I had threatened self-harm and violence against my unborn child. "This is a lie," I gasped, clutching the paper so hard it crumpled. "I never saw this woman professionally. This is a forgery." "It is signed and notarized," Gabriel said, his voice grim. "And because it is dated 7 years ago, it establishes a history. They are painting a picture. Sabine, a picture of a mentally unstable woman who has spent 7 years obsessing over revenge, using her child as a weapon. They want to take Maya," I said, the realization crashing into me like a tidal wave. "They do not want custody. They know Julian does not care about her. They want leverage." The phone on my desk rang. It was the landline. The only line the feds had not disconnected yet. I stared at it. I knew who it was. I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" "Hello, sweetheart," Richard's voice came through, rich with satisfaction. "I hear you are having a busy morning. The feds can be so intrusive. Can they not—" "You bribed a doctor," I hissed, turning my back to the FBI agents. "You falsified medical records. That is prison time. Richard, who is going to prove it?" Richard laughed. "Doctor, Aris is a respected professional. You are a woman who was kicked out of her home for being difficult. And now, you are a woman under federal investigation for fraud. Who do you think the judge will believe, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, or the vulture capitalist who just got raided?" "You are attacking your own granddaughter," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "She is 7 years old. She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," Richard snapped, his voice dropping to a growl. "You used my name to hurt me. Now I am using your blood to stop you. I created you, Sabine, and I can destroy you." I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white. "What do you want?" "It is simple," Richard said. "You are going to drop the debt acceleration. You are going to sign a waiver admitting that the default notice was an error. You are going to release the liens on my house and the Crown, and you are going to transfer the ownership of the debt back to First Trust for 10 cents on the dollar. And if I do?" I asked. "If you do, Julian withdraws the custody petition." Richard said, "We will be generous. We will allow you supervised visitation, once a month, assuming, of course, you seek psychiatric help." "You monster," I whispered. "You would take my child away just to save your building." "I would burn the whole city down to save my reputation," Richard said. "You have 1 hour. Sabine, 1 hour before I call the press and leak that psychiatric report. Once that is out, Child Protective Services will be at Maya's school before you can get there. Do not test me." The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver humming in my ear. The noise of the office, the agents shouting, the servers powering down faded into a dull roar. I felt cold, colder than I had felt under that bridge 7 years ago. This was checkmate. If I fought the fraud charges, they would drag on for months. My assets would remain frozen. I would have no money to fight the custody battle, with the fake medical records and the criminal investigation hanging over me. A family court judge would almost certainly grant temporary custody to Julian. He was the wealthy, stable father with a wife and a home. I was the single mother under federal indictment. They would take Maya. They would put her in that cold, loveless house with Elena and Richard. They would poison her mind against me. They would break her just to punish me. I looked at Gabriel. He looked defeated. "Sabine, we cannot fight the feds in a custody battle at the same time with zero liquidity. He has us." I walked to the window. I looked at the Crown. It stood there, arrogant and unfinished, a monument to my father's ego. He had won. He had played dirty, digging into the gutter to find a weapon I could not defend against. He knew my weakness was not money, it was love. I closed my eyes. I imagined Maya's face, her laugh, the way she squeezed my hand when she was scared. I could not lose her. I would give up the $50 million. I would give up the revenge. I would go back to washing dishes if it meant keeping her safe. But then, a thought struck me. A small, jagged shard of memory. Richard had mentioned the stolen proprietary data. He had accused me of conspiring with internal employees. He was pinning the insider trading on the information I had received about the Crown's financial state. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was framing me. But he had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten the source of that information. He assumed I had hacked his servers or bribed a low-level accountant. He did not know, he could not possibly imagine that the leak came from the man standing right next to him, Marcus Vance. I opened my eyes. Richard had just made a catastrophic mistake. In his rush to file the fraud complaint to the SEC, he had to have submitted a sworn affidavit detailing what information was stolen. To make the charge stick, he had to claim that I possessed confidential documents that only a top-level executive or legal counsel would have access to. If I could prove that those documents were given to me voluntarily by his own legal representative, the theft charge would collapse. It would not be espionage. It would be authorized disclosure. And more importantly, Marcus had been there. Marcus knew about the bribe to Dr. Aris. Marcus knew Julian had never wanted the child. Marcus had been the one to draft the fake trust fund documents 7 years ago. Richard thought Marcus was his dog. He thought Marcus was too terrified, too broken, too owned to ever bite back. He thought Marcus was a non-factor, a piece of furniture in the room where they plotted my destruction. But I owned Marcus's debt, and I had offered him something Richard never had a way out. "Gabriel," I said, turning around. My voice was no longer trembling. It was dead calm. "Yes," Gabriel asked, looking up from the pile of seizure notices. "Do we still have the encrypted sat phone?" I asked. "The one the feds cannot track. It is in the safe in the ceiling panel," Gabriel said. "Why?" "Get it," I said, "and get me the number for Marcus Vance's burner phone." "Sabine," Gabriel warned, "if you contact a witness during a federal raid, they will add obstruction of justice to the list of charges." "I am not contacting a witness," I said, staring at the empty space where my computer used to be. "I am activating an asset." Richard thought he had stripped me of everything. He thought he had me cornered, but he had forgotten the first rule of the jungle: never turn your back on the jackal you think you have tamed. Marcus Vance was currently in Richard's office, likely drafting the press release about my mental breakdown. He was watching them gloat. He was listening to them laugh about how easy it was to bribe Dr. Aris. He was seeing the true face of the people he served. I needed Marcus to be brave for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. "Gabriel," I said as he handed me the heavy black satellite phone. "Richard gave me 1 hour. That is 45 minutes more than I need." I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, a whisper. "Hello." "Marcus," I said. "Do not hang up, and do not look at Richard." "Sabine." Marcus's voice was barely a breath. "They are celebrating. They think you are finished. Richard is talking about sending Maya to boarding school in Switzerland once he gets custody." The rage flared in my chest, hot and blinding, but I pushed it down. "Listen to me very carefully. Marcus, the FBI is in my office. Richard has accused me of insider trading. He claims I stole the data." "I know," Marcus whispered. "I drafted the affidavit. He forced me to sign it. He made me swear I never gave you anything." "Good," I said. "That means he perjured himself, and he forced you to perjure yourself. If this goes to court, you go to prison, Marcus. Richard will throw you under the bus to save himself. He will say you were the rogue employee who leaked the data, and he will testify against you." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Marcus knew it was true. He knew Richard's loyalty ended where his self-interest began. "What do I do?" Marcus whimpered. "I cannot go to prison. I have kids." "You have one chance," I said. "You have the treasure, Marcus, the file you told me about in the parking garage, the recording of Richard admitting to the forgery 7 years ago, and the evidence of the bribes." "I have it," he said. "It is on a USB drive on my keychain. I carry it everywhere. Is the recorder on your phone running right now? I asked. No, he said. Turn it on, I commanded. Right now. Put the phone in your pocket. Go back into that room and ask Richard one question. Ask him, Richard, are you sure, Doctor? Aris's fake report will hold up if Sabine demands a new evaluation. He will kill me, Marcus said. He will bury you if you do not, I countered. Get the confession. Marcus, get him to admit on tape that the medical report is a forgery and the insider trading charge is a fabrication. Record it. Then walk out of that building and come straight to the federal building. I will have a team waiting to put you in protective custody. Sabine. You wanted redemption. Marcus, I said, this is it. Be the man you were supposed to be before my father bought your soul. Do it for Maya. There was a silence, a long, terrifying silence. Then, Marcus Vance spoke, his voice shaking but distinct. I am turning on the recorder. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I looked at Gabriel. We wait. For how long? Gabriel asked. Until the house of cards falls down, I said. I sat down on the floor, amidst the scattered papers and the chaos of the raid. I pulled my knees to my chest. I was gambling my life, my freedom, and my daughter on the courage of a coward. But I knew something Richard didn't. I knew that even a worm will turn if you step on it hard enough. And Richard had been stepping on Marcus for 20 years. The clock ticked. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. My heart was a drum in my ears. If Marcus failed, if Richard caught him, if he lost his nerve. 30 minutes later, the lead FBI agent's phone rang. He answered it, looking annoyed. Then, his expression changed. He frowned. He looked at me. He looked at the phone again. Say that again, the agent said. He is where? With what? He listened for another minute, his face growing pale. He hung up the phone slowly. He looked at his team. Stop the search. The room went silent. The agent walked over to me. He looked confused, almost apologetic. That was the assistant U.S. attorney, he said. A Mr. Marcus Vance just walked into the field office. He has surrendered himself and provided a digital recording and physical evidence regarding a conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and witness tampering by Richard Sterling. I let out a breath that felt like it had been held for 7 years. And, I asked, standing up. And, the agent said, he claims the insider trading charges against you were fabricated to cover up the insolvency of Sterling Enterprises. He claims you are a whistleblower. Ms. Montrose, not a suspect. I smiled. It was a weak, trembling smile, but it was real. I think you should leave my office, I said. And I think you should go arrest my father. The twist had snapped. Richard had pulled the rubber band too tight, and it had snapped back right into his eye. He had forgotten the one person he deemed insignificant, and that oversight was about to cost him everything. The concrete of the parking garage on Lower Wacker Drive smelled of damp limestone and impending violence. It was the kind of place where bad things happen to desperate men. I parked my sedan in the darkest corner of Level 4, keeping the engine running, the heater fighting a losing battle against the Chicago chill. I was not there to kill anyone. I was there to save a life, primarily my own. Marcus Vance's car skidded around the corner 5 minutes later. He parked crookedly, taking up 2 spaces, and stumbled out. He looked like a man who had been running for 7 years. Not 7 minutes. His tie was loosened, his eyes wild, and he was clutching his briefcase to his chest as if it contained the nuclear codes. I stepped out of my car. Marcus jumped, nearly dropping the case. Sabine, he gasped, his breath coming in white puffs in the frigid air. I did it. I recorded him. I have the confession on the phone. But he knows. He suspects something. The way he looked at me when I left the room, I cannot go back there. You are not going back, I said, my voice echoing off the low ceiling. But before you go to the federal building, there is something you need to see. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my coat pocket. It was a document Gabriel had recovered from the trash bin of Richard's private server during our initial data sweep, a document we had decrypted only an hour ago. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his hand trembling as he took it. "Read the second paragraph," I instructed. Marcus squinted in the dim yellow light. As he read, his knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the side mirror of his car to stay upright. "This is a draft," he stammered. "A press release. It is a draft of a statement regarding internal embezzlement at Sterling Enterprises," I explained, my voice devoid of pity. "Richard wrote it 2 weeks ago. He was planning to blame the insolvency of the Crown Project on a rogue legal counsel who misappropriated funds. He was going to frame you, Marcus. If the company went down, you were going to be the one in handcuffs, not him. He had already set up a dummy account in your name to plant the evidence." Marcus stared at the paper. The loyalty he had given my father for 20 years, the self-abasement, the fear it had all been for nothing, to Richard. Marcus was not a partner or even a servant. He was an airbag, designed to be used once in a crash and then discarded. "He was going to send me to prison," Marcus whispered, the realization turning his fear into something colder, harder. "After everything I did for him, he does not care about you," I said. "He never did. You are a liability to him, but to me, you are an asset." Marcus looked up at me. The terror in his eyes was replaced by a profound, burning hatred. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. "I have something for you," Marcus said. He opened his briefcase. He did not pull out papers. He pulled out a heavy, encrypted hard drive. "This is the archive," he said. "The treasure I told you about. I have been recording every conversation in that office for 10 years. Just insurance. I never thought I would use it." I took the drive. It felt heavy in my hand. Cold metal. "What is on it?" I asked. "Everything," Marcus said. "The conversation from 7 years ago, where he practiced forging your signature on the trust fund documents until he got it perfect. The bribes he paid to the city inspectors to ignore the foundation cracks in the crown, the payoffs to the union leaders." He paused, looking at me with a strange expression. "And Julian? What about Julian?" I asked. "Julian has been skimming from the operational budget for 3 years, Marcus revealed. $2 million. He used it to buy an apartment for his mistress, Chloe, and cars, and jewelry. Richard has known since the first dollar went missing," Marcus said. "He let Julian do it. He kept the evidence in his safe. He told me once that a guilty man is the most loyal employee because he knows you can destroy him. He has been blackmailing Julian into submission for years." I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "So Julian is not just a traitor. He is a thief and a puppet." "He is," Marcus agreed. "And there is more. Julian has a gambling problem, worse than mine. He owes money to the syndicate. Richard paid off the first debt. But Julian is back in the hole, deep." I gripped the hard drive. This was not just evidence. It was a nuclear warhead. "Go to the feds, Marcus," I said. "Give them the recording of the fraud. Give them the bribery evidence, but do not give them the file on Julian yet." "Why not?" Marcus asked. "Because Julian is coming for my daughter," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "And I want to handle him personally." The turnaround was swift and brutal. With Marcus's cooperation and the physical evidence of the forgery and the frame-up, the narrative flipped overnight. The FBI agents who had raided my office returned 24 hours later, not to arrest me, but to return my servers. The freeze on my bank accounts was lifted at 9 o'clock the next morning. I was no longer a suspect. I was a cooperating witness and a victim of a massive corporate conspiracy. Richard Sterling was now the one with federal agents swarming his mansion, seizing his files, and questioning his staff. He was out on bail, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the smell of blood was in the water. However, the war was not over. There was still one battle left to fight, the most important one. The family court hearing was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. The courtroom was sterile and suffocating, smelling of floor wax and broken families. Julian sat at the petitioner's table, looking surprisingly confident. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my first apartment, Next to him was a high-priced divorce attorney known for destroying mothers. Richard sat in the gallery behind them. He looked tired, his face gray, but his eyes were still defiant. He was there to intimidate me. He wanted me to know that even with the FBI breathing down his neck, he could still take Maya away. I sat alone at the respondents' table. I had a lawyer, of course the best in Chicago, but I had told him to sit back. This was my kill, the judge. A stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked over the files. "We are here on an emergency petition for custody," the judge said. "Mr. Thorne alleges that Ms. Montrose is mentally unstable and unfit. Mr. Thorne, your opening statement." Julian's lawyer stood up. He painted a picture of me as a deranged, vengeful woman. He cited the fake report from Dr. Aris, which they were still trying to pass off as legitimate, despite the investigation, and claimed that my obsession with destroying Richard Sterling proved I was a danger to the child. "She is a shark, Your Honor," the lawyer said, pointing an accusing finger at me. "She has spent 7 years plotting revenge. She refers to her own father as a debt. A woman who views family as a financial transaction cannot be trusted with a sensitive 7-year-old girl. Mr. Thorne, on the other hand, is a pillar of the community, a stable executive, and a loving father who wants to rescue his daughter from this toxic environment." Julian nodded solemnly, looking every inch the concerned parent. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Montrose, your response?" I stood up. I did not have a prepared speech. I did not have a plea for mercy. I had a file. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "I do not wish to waste the court's time defending myself against forged medical records, which are currently the subject of a federal perjury investigation. Instead, I would like to address the petitioner's claim of stability." I walked toward the bench, ignoring Julian's glare. "Mr. Thorne claims to be a financially stable executive," I said. "However, I would like to submit into evidence Exhibit B." I handed a stack of documents to the bailiff. "These are bank statements from Sterling Enterprises," I explained. "They show unauthorized transfers totaling $2.3 million over the last 3 years. Transfers made by Julian Thorne to shell companies controlled by his mistress, Ms. Chloe Davis." Julian's face went white. He started to stand up. "Objection. That is irrelevant. It speaks to character and financial stability, Your Honor," I continued, pressing on. "But if theft is not enough, perhaps we should discuss debt." I turned to look directly at Julian. He was gripping the table, his knuckles white. "Exhibit C," I announced. "These are promissory notes purchased by my holding company, Nemesis, from a collection agency operating out of the back of a pool hall in West Loop. They are gambling debts. Specifically, debts incurred by Mr. Thorne for high-stakes poker." I looked at the judge. "The petitioner currently owes $400,000 to unauthorized lenders. He has missed his last 3 payments. Just last week, he sent a text message to his bookie, which is included in the file, offering to make it up once he secured control of his daughter's trust fund." The courtroom went silent. A gasp rippled through the small gallery. Richard, sitting in the back, closed his eyes. He knew. He knew I had found the one thing he had used to control Julian, and I had turned it into a weapon. "He does not want custody, Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing with disgust. "He wants collateral. He wants access to the child support payments and the trust fund my mother left for Maya, the only trust fund Richard Sterling failed to steal, so he can pay off his gambling debts and keep his mistress happy." I turned back to Julian. He was shaking. He looked like a man who had been stripped naked in public. "You called me a liability 7 years ago. Julian," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But look at you. You are insolvent. You are a thief. And you are a deadbeat." The judge looked at the documents. She looked at Julian, who was now sweating profusely, unable to meet her gaze. She looked at the text messages. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice icy, "is this true?" Julian opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at his lawyer, who was busy packing his briefcase, clearly realizing he was on a sinking ship. "I can explain," Julian stammered. "There is nothing to explain," the judge snapped. "This court finds the petitioner's request not only meritless, but malicious. The petition for custody is dismissed with prejudice." She banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot ending a war. "Furthermore," the judge continued, glaring at Julian, "I am issuing a temporary restraining order. Mr. Thorne, you are not to come within 500 feet of Ms. Montrose or the child, and I will be forwarding these files to the district attorney regarding the embezzlement allegations." Julian slumped into his chair. Defeated. He had walked in hoping to steal my child. He was walking out facing a prison sentence. I turned around. Richard was standing up to leave. Our eyes met across the gallery. There was no arrogance left in him, no bluster. He looked old. He looked tired. He saw what I had done to Julian, and he knew he was next. I had not just beaten them in business. I had beaten them in the mud, in the very place they thought they could bury me. I walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The air outside was cold, but for the first time in 7 years. I did not feel the chill. I felt the warmth of absolute, total victory. I took out my phone and dialed Gabriel. "It is done," I said. "Julian is finished. Now, prepare the final paperwork for Richard. I want the surrender of the company on my desk by morning." "He will never sign it," Gabriel said. "He will," I said, watching Richard exit the courthouse, alone, his shoulders slumped against the wind. "Because he has seen what happens to people who owe me a debt." I got into my car. The engine roared to life. I had the lawyer. I had the evidence. I had the law. And tomorrow, I would have the name. "Home," I told the driver. "I have a daughter to hug." The game was over. Now, it was time for the execution. The Sterling Plaza Hotel was a monument to the Gilded Age, a cavern of crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and gold leaf that screamed old money. It was the kind of place where Chicago's elite gathered to pat themselves on the back for writing tax-deductible checks to vague charities while ignoring the homeless veterans sleeping on the heating grates outside. Tonight, the ballroom was packed. 300 of the city's most influential people senators, hedge fund managers, tech moguls were sipping vintage champagne and nibbling on caviar blinis. They were there for the annual Sterling Foundation Gala. Richard Sterling was holding court in the center of the room. I stood on the mezzanine balcony, hidden in the shadows of a marble pillar, looking down at the spectacle. It was pathetic. It was a wake masquerading as a celebration. Richard was wearing a tuxedo that was perhaps a little too tight around the waist, his face flushed with the manic energy of a man trying to outrun an avalanche. He was laughing too loud. He was gripping hands too firmly. He was desperate to prove that the rumors swirling around the city were just that, rumors. He believed that the events of the last 48 hours could be contained. He thought that because he had made bail on the initial fraud charges quietly, through a back channel he still had time to maneuver. He thought that if he could just secure one more massive investment from the sharks in this room, he could pay off Nemesis Holdings, silence Marcus, and bury the evidence. He did not know that the ground he was standing on no longer belonged to him. "Ms. Montrose," a voice said softly beside me. It was the general manager of the hotel, a man named Henri, who had worked for the Sterling family for 30 years. He looked terrified. He held a master key card in his trembling hand. "The audiovisual team is ready," Henri whispered. "They have switched the feed as you instructed. But, madam, if Mr. Sterling finds out I helped you." "Mr. Sterling is a guest in my hotel." "Henri," I said, taking the key card. "And guests do not fire the staff. Owners do, and as of this morning, when the deed transfer for the Sterling Plaza was recorded to satisfy the lien on the secondary mortgage. I am the owner. You answer to me now." Henri nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Ms. Montrose, we are ready." "Good," I said. "Let the show begin." I smoothed the fabric of my midnight blue gown. It was sleek, armor-like, and cost more than the tuition for the law school Richard had refused to pay for. I walked down the grand staircase, not rushing. I wanted to savor the descent. On the stage, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit Richard. He stepped up to the podium, beaming with that practiced plastic charisma that had fooled investors for decades. The crowd quieted down. "My friends," Richard began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you for coming. Tonight is not just about charity, it is about values. In a world that is constantly changing, we must hold on to the things that matter: integrity, loyalty, and most importantly, family." I reached the bottom of the stairs. A few heads turned. People started to whisper. They recognized me from the court news, from the gossip columns, the exile who had returned. "Family is the bedrock of the Sterling Empire," Richard continued, placing a hand over his heart. "It is the legacy I built for my children. It is the promise that we take care of our own." "That is funny," I said. I did not shout. I spoke into a wireless microphone that the sound technician had just activated for me. My voice cut through the room, clear and sharp as a diamond cutter. Richard froze. He looked around, squinting into the darkness. "Who said that?" "I did, Richard," I said, stepping into the pool of light at the center of the room. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor. "Sabine," Richard hissed into the mic, forgetting to cover it. "What are you doing here? Security? Get her out." Two large security guards stepped forward from the wings, but before they could reach me, my own team, 4 men in dark suits who looked like they ate concrete for breakfast, stepped out from the crowd and blocked them. "I do not think so," I said. Reaching the stage, I did not climb the steps. I stood in front of the stage, looking up at him. "You cannot remove the owner from the premises." "Owner," Richard laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "You are delusional. This is the Sterling Plaza." "It was," I corrected, "until 9 o'clock this morning, when Nemesis Holdings exercised the cross-collateralization clause on your defaulted loans. You put this hotel up as security for the Crown Project 3 years ago. Dad, did you forget? Or did you just assume you would never get caught?" The crowd murmured. The word default rippled through the room like a virus. "You are ruining the gala," Elena shrieked from the front table. She was wearing a diamond necklace that I knew for a fact was bought with company credit. "This is for charity for the orphans." "Ah, yes, the charity," I said, turning to face the audience. "Let us talk about where the money for this gala actually came from." I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. Behind Richard, the massive projection screen that was displaying the Sterling Foundation logo flickered. The image changed. It was not a picture of smiling orphans. It was a bank statement, a forensic accounting flowchart, red arrows pointing from one account to another. "What you are looking at," I announced, my voice ringing with authority, "is the internal ledger of the Sterling Employee Pension Fund. Note the transfer date 3 days ago. Note the amount, $250,000. The room went deathly silent. Richard Sterling drained the retirement accounts of his janitors, his secretaries, and his construction workers to pay for this champagne, I said, gesturing to the glass in the hand of a senator standing nearby. "He stole from the people who clean his floors so he could impress the people who sign his permits." "Lies," Richard screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. He turned to look at the screen, and for the first time, he saw the undeniable proof of his crime projected 20 feet high. "Turn it off. Cut the power." "I cannot do that, Richard," I said, "because the second slide is even more interesting." The screen changed again. This time, it was a legal document, a notice of seizure. "This is a foreclosure order," I read aloud. "Effective at 12 o'clock tonight, which is in exactly 10 minutes, every asset listed under Sterling Enterprises will be frozen and seized by the primary creditor. That includes the Crown. That includes the corporate jet. That includes the mansion you slept in last night. I turned back to the crowd. The elites of Chicago were backing away. They were putting down their glasses. They were checking their phones. No one wanted to be seen in the blast radius of a financial nuclear bomb. "You are all drinking on stolen money," I said coldly. "If I were you, I would leave before the FBI arrives to collect the evidence. They are very particular about witness statements. Panic is a contagious thing. It started with a few people heading for the exits, and within seconds, it was a stampede. The glamorous facade of the gala disintegrated into a chaotic scramble for coats and valets. Richard stood on the stage, watching his audience flee. He looked like a king whose castle had just turned to sand. Then, he looked at me. The hatred in his eyes was absolute. It was the look of a man who wanted to kill. "You bitch," he roared. He leaped from the stage. It was a clumsy, desperate lunge. He raised his fist, intending to strike me, to hurt me, to silence the voice that was speaking the truth, but he never reached me, my head of security. A former Navy SEAL named Davis intercepted him mid-air. Davis didn't strike him. He simply caught Richard's wrist and twisted. Richard slammed into the floor with a sickening thud. "Get off me!" Richard screamed, thrashing like a trapped animal. "I am Richard Sterling. I own this city." "You own nothing," I said, standing over him. I looked down at the man who had terrified me for 20 years. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He was just a thief in a tuxedo. Elena, seeing her husband pinned to the floor, let out a theatrical gasp. She put her hand to her forehead, fluttered her eyelashes, and collapsed into the arms of a waiter. It was a terrible performance. "Stop acting, Elena," I said without looking at her. "The ambulance is not coming, and neither is the limo. It has been repossessed." Elena's eyes snapped open. She scrambled to her feet, abandoning the feint. "You cannot take the car. It is in my name." "Actually," I said, "it was in the company's name, and the company belongs to me." I looked back at Richard. Davis pulled him up, holding him firmly by the arms. Richard's bow tie was crooked. His hair was a mess. He was panting, his eyes darting around the empty ballroom. "Why?" Richard whispered. "Why go this far? You have the money. You have the building. Why humiliate me?" "Because you didn't just break the law." "Richard," I said, leaning in close so only he could hear. "You broke me. You broke your family. And you did it with a smile." I checked my watch. "It is 12 o'clock, I said. I pulled a document from my clutch. It was the final piece of the puzzle. "This is not a seizure notice," I said, tucking it into his breast pocket. "This is an involuntary bankruptcy petition. Chapter 7, Liquidation. I have filed it on behalf of Nemesis Holdings, joined by the pension fund trustees and the contractors you stiffed." Richard stared at me. Chapter 7 meant the end. It meant no restructuring, no comeback, no saving the brand. It meant the company was dead, and its carcass would be sold off for scraps. "You are killing the company," he gasped. "My father built that company, and his son destroyed it," I said. "I am just the coroner." I signaled to Davis. "Let him go." Davis released him. Richard stumbled back, adjusting his jacket with trembling hands. He looked at the empty room, the half-eaten food, the discarded napkins. The party was over. "Get out of my hotel," I said. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but he had no words left. He looked at Elena, who was busy stuffing silverware into her purse. Old habits die hard. He looked at the screen, which was still glowing red with his failures. He turned and walked toward the exit. He walked with a limp I had never seen before. He did not look back. I stood alone in the center of the ballroom. The silence was heavy, but it was not oppressive. It was clean. It was the silence that comes after a storm has washed everything away. I looked at the pension fund chart on the screen. "Henri?" I called out to the shadows. The manager stepped forward. "Yes, Ms. Montrose. Liquidate the catering deposit," I said, "and sell the leftover champagne back to the distributor. Take every penny and put it back into the employee pension fund. I want the staff made whole by morning." "Yes, madam," Henri said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Thank you, madam." I walked toward the exit. I had one more stop to make. The boardroom. The place where it had all started. The place where I would finally rewrite the ending of the story. The liability had just cleared the ledger. The VIP room was a glass box suspended above the ballroom, soundproofed against the chaos I had just unleashed below. It smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive leather, the scent of deals made in the dark. But tonight, there would be no deal. There would only be a sentencing. I stood by the door, locking it from the inside. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the room. Richard sat on a velvet sofa, his head in his hands. His tuxedo jacket was torn at the shoulder from his scuffle with Davis. Elena was curled in the armchair opposite him, weeping silently into a napkin, her mascara running in black rivers down her face. Julian stood by the window, looking down at the empty street where his life had just been towed away. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck, and I was the ocean that had drowned them. Richard looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who had been running a marathon on broken legs. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice raspy. "You humiliated us. You destroyed the gala. You have the hotel. You have the debt. Is it enough? Have you extracted your pound of flesh?" "It is not about happiness, Richard," I said, walking slowly to the center of the room. "It is about accounting. You taught me that. Everything must balance." "We are family," Richard pleaded. Shifting tactics. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, wheedling tone that made my skin crawl. "I made mistakes. I admit it. I was hard on you. But I did it to toughen you up. Look at you now. You are a killer. I made you a killer. Sabine, doesn't that count for something? We can work together, with your capital and my connections." "Your connections," I interrupted, laughing softly. "Your connections just ran out the back door to avoid being photographed with you. You have no connections. You have no credit. You have no friends." "I am still your father," he whispered. "Blood is thicker than water, and ink is thicker than blood," I countered. "Especially on a contract." I pulled a chair opposite him and sat down. I wanted to be close enough to see the pupils of his eyes dilate when I dropped the final hammer. "You called me a liability," I said. "You were right. I was a liability, but you forgot the most basic rule of finance. Dad, when you ignore a debt, it compounds. Interest accumulates. 7 years of interest, 7 years of anger, 7 years of cold nights and instant noodles and watching my daughter sleep in a drawer." I leaned forward. "Compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it, earns it. He who doesn't, pays it. And today, Richard, the bill is due." Richard stared at me, hatred flickering behind the fear. "You have taken the buildings. What else is there? I have nothing left to give you." "Oh, there is one thing," I said. "The one thing you value more than money, more than the buildings, more than me." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thin blue folder. "The name," I said. Richard frowned. "What?" "The name Sterling," I explained. "It is a good name, strong, respectable, or at least, it used to be." I opened the folder. 5 years ago, a small manufacturing company in Ohio called Sterling Bros. Filed a trademark infringement lawsuit against your real estate empire. They claimed your expansion into industrial warehousing violated their prior claim to the Sterling mark in the Midwest region. Do you remember that? Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Some nuisance suit. My lawyers buried it in motions. It went away." "It did not go away," I said. "It went dormant, because you ignored it. You never settled. You never secured the final judgment. You assumed they ran out of money, and they did." I paused, savoring the moment. "So I bought them," I said. Richard went still. "You what?" "I bought Sterling Brothers, of Ohio 3 months ago," I said. "I bought the company, their inventory, and most importantly, Their intellectual property rights, which means I now own the primary trademark for the name Sterling in the commercial sector. I flipped a page. And since you, Richard, have been operating in their protected territory without a license for 5 years, you are in willful violation of federal trademark law. As the new owner of the trademark, I filed an injunction this morning. I slid the paper across the low table. This is a cease and desist order, I said. Effective immediately. You are legally prohibited from using the name Sterling for any business, charity, or public entity. You cannot call yourself Sterling Enterprises. You cannot hold a Sterling Gala. You cannot even print business cards with the name Richard Sterling if they are used for commerce. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he was suffocating. To a narcissist, his name is his soul. I had just erased his identity. You stole my name, he gasped. I repossessed it, I corrected. It was tarnished. I am going to clean it. I sat back. So here's the situation. You are bankrupt, you are homeless, you are nameless, and thanks to Marcus Vance, you are about to be indicted. At the mention of Marcus, Richard flinched as if slapped. Marcus, he spat. That traitor. Marcus provided the FBI with everything, I said. The recordings of the bribery, the proof of the forgery 7 years ago, the evidence that you tried to frame him, it is enough to put you away for 20 years. Richard, you will die in a cell. You will wear an orange jumpsuit, and no one will care who you used to be. Elena let out a fresh wail of despair. Julian looked like he was about to vomit. However, I said, I am a mother. And because I am a mother, I do not want my daughter to grow up reading headlines about her grandfather rotting in prison. It is bad for her mental health. So I am offering you a choice. A choice? Richard asked, hope flaring in his eyes like a dying match. Option 1, I said. I hand the rest of the Marcus files to the district attorney. You, Julian, and Elena go to prison for conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. I take everything you have left through the courts, and you spend the rest of your lives behind bars. And option 2, he asked hoarsely. I pulled out a thick document. It was bound in heavy legal paper. Option 2, I said. You sign this. Richard looked at the document. What is it? It is an irrevocable deed of gift, I said. You will transfer every remaining personal asset the offshore accounts you think I do not know about. The hidden gold reserves in Zurich, the vacation home in the Alps, and the contents of your safe deposit boxes to a trust. A trust for you, he sneered. So you are just a thief. Not for me, I said, my voice sharp. For Maya. Silence filled the room. Julian looked up, startled. Richard blinked. My daughter, I said. Your granddaughter. The child you tried to erase. The child you used as a pawn. You are going to give her everything, every last dime. You will secure her future so completely that she will never have to depend on a man, or a bank, or a father for anything, ever again. And what do I get? Richard asked. You get freedom, I said. You sign the papers. You plead guilty to a lesser charge of negligence, which I will arrange with the prosecutor in exchange for the restitution you are making to the pension fund. You avoid prison. I leaned in. But there is a condition. You leave Chicago. You leave Illinois. You go to a place where no one knows you. And you stay there. If you ever come back, if you ever try to contact the media, if you ever speak the name Montrose or Sterling again, I will release the rest of the evidence, and I will put you in jail until you rot. Richard looked at the papers. He looked at his shaking hands. He looked at Elena, who was nodding frantically, begging him with her eyes to take the deal. She did not want to go to prison. She would rather be poor in exile than rich in a cell. You are leaving me with nothing, Richard whispered. I am leaving you with your life, I said, which is more than you gave me when you threw me out in a blizzard. I took a heavy fountain pen from my pocket. I uncapped it. I placed it on the document. Sign it, Richard, I commanded, or I call the FBI agents waiting in the lobby. Richard picked up the pen. His hand trembled violently. He looked at the signature line. It was the end of his empire, the end of his ego. He hesitated. "Do it," Elena shrieked. "Richard, sign it." He closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out, not of sorrow, but of self-pity. He pressed the pen to the paper. He signed, Richard Sterling. It was not the bold, arrogant signature of the CEO. It was the shaky, defeated scrawl of a broken old man. He dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and fell to the floor. "Done," he whispered. "Good," I said, snatching the documents before he could change his mind. I checked the signature. It was valid. I checked the notary seal I had pre-stamped. It was legal. I stood up. "Get out of here. My driver will take you to the airport. You have a one-way ticket to a rental property in Florida. It is small. It is humid. You will hate it. Goodbye, Richard." Richard stood up. He looked at me one last time. There was no fire left, just ash. He shuffled toward the door, Elena clutching his arm, dragging him away from the ruin of their lives. Only Julian remained. He had not moved from the window. Now, he turned to face me. He looked at the door where Richard had exited, then back at me. He realized he was alone in the cage with the tiger. He fell to his knees. Literally. It was a pathetic sight. The man who had once been the golden boy, the man whose smile had charmed me into bed, was now kneeling on the carpet, weeping. "Sabine," he sobbed. "Sabine, please, I am sorry. I was weak. He forced me. You know what he is like?" "Get up, Julian," I said, my voice cold as liquid nitrogen. "You are ruining the carpet." "I want to see her," Julian pleaded, crawling forward a few inches. "I want to see Maya. She is my daughter, too. I signed the birth certificate denial because he made me. I love her. I want to be a father." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No anger, no love, no hate. Just the indifference one feels for a cockroach. "You do not love her," I said. "You love the idea of her trust fund. You love the idea that she could be your anchor now that the ship has sunk." "No," Julian cried. "I changed. I can change. Please, Sabine, let me see her. Just once. Tell her, Daddy is sorry." I walked over to him. I leaned down until my face was inches from his. "Daddy," I whispered. "You are not a father. Julian, you are a donor, a biological necessity that I have long since discarded." "You sold her," I said, my voice rising. 7 years ago, you stood in that office and traded her life for a promotion. You sold your own flesh and blood for a corner office and a leased Porsche. That was the transaction price. You made the sale." I stood up and smoothed my dress. "And now," I said, looking down at him with absolute contempt, "the buyer is rejecting the merchandise. You are fired, Julian, from the company, from the family, and from her life." "You cannot do this," he wailed. "I just did," I said. "The restraining order is permanent. The assets are mine. The name is mine. And the child is mine." I pressed the intercom button on the wall. "Davis," I said, "Remove Mr. Thorne from the premises. He is trespassing." The door opened. Davis walked in. Flanked by 2 guards, they grabbed Julian by the arms. He screamed, dragging his feet as they hauled him out. "Sabine, Sabine. She is my daughter." His voice faded down the hallway, and then there was silence. I stood in the center of the VIP room. I looked at the signed deed on the table. I looked at the empty champagne glasses. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The snow was falling harder now, covering the grime of Chicago in a blanket of pure white. I took a deep breath. My chest felt light. The weight I had carried for 7 years, the weight of the rejection, the poverty, the fear was gone. I had paid the debt. I had balanced the ledger. I picked up the phone and dialed the only number that mattered. "Hello?" a sleepy voice answered. It was the nanny. "Is she asleep?" I asked softly. "Yes, Ms. Montrose. She fell asleep an hour ago. Kiss her for me, I said. Tell her Mommy bought the house, and tell her we are going home. I hung up. I picked up the pen Richard had dropped. I put it in my purse. It was a souvenir, a reminder that even the biggest giants fall if you chop them down at the knees. I turned off the lights in the VIP room, leaving the ghosts of the Sterling Empire in the dark. I had a demolition to schedule, and a new name to hang on the door. The dawn did not break over Chicago with a burst of golden light. It arrived in a wash of steel-gray clarity, stripping away the shadows of the night before. I stood on the curb outside the Sterling Plaza Hotel, wrapping my coat tighter against the morning chill. The snow was still falling, dusting the shoulders of the police officers who were currently shoving my father into the back of a squad car. Richard looked at me through the glass. His face was pressed against the window, his expression a mask of betrayal and confusion. He was shouting something, but the heavy glass reduced his rage to a silent movie. He thought we had a deal. He thought that by signing over his assets, he had bought his freedom. He was half right. I walked over to the car just as the officer was about to close the door. I signaled for him to wait. The officer, recognizing the new owner of the hotel, nodded and stepped back. I leaned down. The window rolled down halfway. "You lied," Richard hissed, the spittle flying from his lips. "We signed a contract. You said I would go to Florida. You said no prison. I said I would not send you to prison for the fraud you committed against the company," I corrected him calmly. "And I kept my word. Richard, I did not give the district attorney the files on the pension fund theft. I did not give them the recordings of the bribery." I paused, letting a small, cold snowflake melt on my cheek. "But the Internal Revenue Service," I shrugged. "They do not need my permission to audit a man who has not paid federal income tax on his offshore accounts for 10 years. It seems Marcus was very thorough in his record-keeping. He sent a separate package to the Treasury Department this morning. I simply forgot to mention it." "You set me up," Richard screamed. "You are the devil." "I am the auditor," I said, "and you have been underreporting your sins." I motioned to the officer. "Take him away." The window rolled up, cutting off his screams. As the car pulled away, I watched the red and blue lights reflect against the snow. It was not a triumphant procession. It was just the garbage being taken out. Behind the squad car, a second vehicle waited for Julian. He was not screaming. He was weeping, his head bowed low, his hands cuffed behind his back. He did not look at me. He was broken in a way that could never be fixed, stripped of his arrogance, his family, and his future. He was finally facing the one thing he had spent his life avoiding: consequences. I watched them disappear into the morning traffic. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I expected joy. I expected a surge of adrenaline, but what I felt was lighter, quieter. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being lifted from my shoulders after a 20-mile hike. It was relief. 2 hours later, I walked into the building formerly known as Sterling Enterprises. The lobby was quiet. The employees were whispering in huddles, eyeing me with a mixture of fear and awe as I passed. They knew who I was now. I was not the exile. I was the conqueror. I took the private elevator to the top floor. The doors opened directly into the executive suite. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather, the same smell that had haunted my nightmares for 7 years. But today, the air felt different. It felt like mine. I walked into Richard's office. It was exactly as he had left it, a shrine to his own ego. The massive oak desk, the leather chair that looked like a throne, and dominating the room, the 6-foot oil painting of Richard Sterling hanging above the fireplace. In the painting, he was standing tall, one hand on a globe, looking like a titan of industry. It was a lie painted in oil. "Get it down," I said. 2 maintenance workers who had been waiting for me stepped forward. They set up a ladder. It took them 5 minutes to unhook the heavy frame. They lowered it to the floor, leaning it against the wall. Richard's painted eyes stared up at the ceiling, powerless. "What should we do with it, Ms. Montrose?" one of the workers asked. Put it in storage. Burn it, I said. Or throw it in the dumpster. I do not care. Just get it out of my sight. They dragged the portrait out. The wall behind it was pale, a rectangle of lighter paint where the sun hadn't touched for 20 years, a blank slate. Ms. Montrose. I turned. Marcus Vance stood in the doorway. He looked different. He was no longer wearing the terrified, sweaty expression of a man with a gun to his head. He looked tired. Yes, but he stood straighter. He was holding a small cardboard box. I brought the keys, Marcus said. Walking over to the desk, he placed a set of heavy brass keys on the mahogany surface. The keys to the law office, the keys to the safe, the keys to the storage units, everything. Thank you. Marcus, I said. He hesitated, shifting his weight. I spoke to the prosecutor. Because of my cooperation and the evidence I provided against Richard and Julian, they are offering me a plea deal, probation, no prison time, but I will lose my law license for a few years. That seems fair, I said. You helped a monster. Marcus, you have to pay the price. I know, he said softly. I am ready to pay it. He looked around the room. I do not have a job anymore. No firm will hire a disbarred lawyer who turned on his client. I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in college. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I know I do not deserve it, Sabine, but I know this company. I know where everybody is buried. I know how to navigate the zoning laws better than anyone in this city. I can help you rebuild. I looked at him. I saw the man who had handed me an eviction notice 7 years ago. But I also saw the man who had handed me the recording that saved my life. I walked around the desk and sat in my father's chair. It was big, but I would adjust it. I do not need a lawyer, Marcus, I said. I have plenty of those. I need a director of operations, someone who knows how to clean up a mess. Marcus's head snapped up. You would hire me. I am not hiring you, I said. I am indenturing you. I leaned forward. You will work for me. You will run the logistics for the new projects. You will be paid a fair salary, enough to keep your house and pay for your kids' tuition, but you will never, ever lie to me. You will never hide a document. You will never skim a penny. I narrowed my eyes. Because if you do, Marcus, I will not call the police. I will handle it myself. Do you understand? Yes, Marcus breathed. Yes. Sabine, I swear. Ms. Montrose, I corrected. Ms. Montrose, he repeated. Thank you. Go find yourself a desk on the 30th floor, I said. And Marcus, get someone to paint this office. I hate this color. I want it white. Clean white. At noon, the elevator doors opened again. This time, it was not a lawyer or a cop. Mommy? Maya ran across the polished marble floor, her sneakers squeaking. She was wearing her pink puffer jacket and a backpack that was too big for her. Behind her, my security guard, Davis, smiled and waved. I knelt down just in time to catch her. She collided with me, a ball of energy and warmth. I buried my face in her hair, smelling the strawberry shampoo and the cold winter air. Did you buy the big building? Maya asked, pulling back to look at me with wide eyes. I did, baby, I said, smoothing her hair. I bought the big building. She looked around. Is the bad man here? She meant Richard. She had met him only once, briefly, and she had hidden behind my legs the whole time. Children have an instinct for darkness that adults often ignore. No, I said, standing up and holding her hand. The bad man is gone. He is never coming back. Good, she said decisively. Can we play hide and seek? I laughed. The sound echoed in the hallway, the same hallway where, 7 years ago, I had been dragged out by security, crying and begging. Now, my daughter's laughter filled the space, chasing away the ghosts. We can do whatever we want, I said. I took her hand and led her to the window. We looked out over the city. The snow had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. casting a brilliant, blinding light over the skyscrapers. Below us, workers were already removing the massive brass letters from the front of the building. I watched as the S of Sterling was lowered by a crane, swinging in the wind like a hanged man. "What are they doing?" Maya asked. "They are changing the name," I said. "What will it be called?" "Montrose Tower," I said. "After Grandma," Maya smiled. "I like that name." "I do too," I whispered. I had already drawn up the papers for the new foundation. The money Richard had earmarked for the crown, the $50 million I had forced him to liquidate, would not go into another skyscraper. It was going into the Montrose Fund. It would be a sanctuary, a network of legal aid clinics, emergency shelters, and financial literacy programs specifically designed for women who had been cut off, disowned, or abandoned. I would teach them what I had learned the hard way, that money is a tool, that law is a weapon, and that they were not liabilities. They were assets waiting to be realized. I would turn Richard's monument to vanity into a fortress for the people he despised. It was the ultimate revenge. Every dollar he had stolen would be used to empower the women he would have thrown out into the snow. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The office was quiet now. Marcus had gone to set up his new workspace. The workers had finished for the day. I sat in the window seat, wrapped in a blanket I had brought from home. Maya was asleep on the sofa, clutching her teddy bear. I looked at the city. It was beautiful. For years, I had looked at this skyline and felt only hunger. I had felt like a wolf circling the fire, waiting for a scrap of meat. Now, I was sitting at the hearth, but I knew the truth. I had not won because I was smarter. I had not won because I was richer. I had won because I was willing to feel the pain. Richard and Julian had spent their lives running from discomfort, numbing themselves with money and lies. I had walked into the blizzard. I had let the cold burn me until I was harder than ice. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I did not see a victim. I did not see a survivor. I saw a woman who had bought her own freedom. "They say blood is thicker than water," I said to the empty room, my voice soft but steady. "They say you cannot choose your family. They say you have to forgive to move on." I reached out and touched the cold glass, tracing the line of the horizon. "They are wrong. Sometimes the family tree is rotten. Sometimes the roots are poisoned, and when that happens, you do not water it. You do not pray for it. You chop it down." I looked over at Maya, sleeping peacefully. She would never know the cold. She would never know the hunger. She would grow up knowing that her name was her own, and that her worth was not negotiable. "I did not destroy them because I hated them," I whispered. "I destroyed them because I loved myself enough to stop paying their debts." I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Outside, the city lights flickered on, a million stars waking up in the darkness. "And for the first time in 7 years," I said, smiling as a single tear traced a warm path down my cheek, "I do not feel cold at all." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please drop a comment below and let me know which part of the world you are in if you enjoyed Sabine's journey of revenge and redemption. Please subscribe to the channel BitterSweet Drama Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear that they are not a liability. They are a force of nature.